Why Roosevelt almost fired MacArthur for a completely personal reason. It reads like the headline of a political thriller. But the truth, as often happens with history, sits somewhere between headline and rumor. Messy, shaded, and stubbornly ambiguous. What could make Franklin D. Roosevelt, the wartime president balancing coalitions, public morale, and global strategy, consider removing Douglas MacArthur, one of America's most celebrated generals? Was it strategy? Or was it something far more personal? An insult, a slight, a private exchange that spiraled into a public risk? Douglas MacArthur was not an ordinary officer. By the early 1940s, he was myth and headline. The West Point grandee, the man who swaggered in uniform, who had been both the Army's reformer and the Philippines' protector. He cultivated an image that seemed larger than the man in any small office. Franklin Roosevelt, by contrast, moved in a different register. He was a politician first, a commander-in-chief who measured military decisions not only by maps and logistics, but by elections, alliances, and the fragile business of public confidence. That difference, image against calculation, charisma against political necessity, is where most of the friction between generals and presidents is born. If you like deep dives into the people behind history, subscribe. The claim that Roosevelt nearly fired MacArthur is not an unambiguous, well-documented courtroom fact. Primary documents confirming a near dismissal for some single, neatly identifiable personal incident are sparse. Historians who probe the Roosevelt-MacArthur relationship find scraps of friction, brusque telegrams, complaints from aides, and the occasional private remark captured in diaries. From those fragments, several competing narratives have been constructed. None is proven beyond doubt. All are useful for understanding how personality can become policy. One hypothesis frames the rupture as the result of public insubordination. MacArthur's style was theatrical. He liked to make statements that would land on the front page. In wartime, that has a double edge. It can rally a nation, but it can also undercut civilian control. Imagine a general who, in an interview or a public address, appears to promise victories or criticize strategy. To a president already juggling domestic pressures and allied politics, that looks dangerously close to political ambition. Some commentators have argued that Roosevelt feared MacArthur's publicity and its potential to create a rival power center, especially in the Pacific Theater where MacArthur's celebrity dwarfed many politicians. If a commander appears to be speaking directly to the public, bypassing civilian channels, can the president allow it? According to some readings of the wartime correspondence and press exchanges, Roosevelt bristled at moments when MacArthur's pronouncements threatened to make him a public figure apart from the administration's unified voice. Whether Roosevelt ever formally moved to fire him for that reason is indefinido. What is clear is that the possibility of public insubordination created genuine anxiety in the White House. A second plausible scenario turns on personal slights and social rupture. Leaders are human. They keep score, and private affronts can fester into public crises. Several accounts suggest that Roosevelt and his inner circle, including Eleanor Roosevelt, sometimes perceived MacArthur's demeanor as dismissive, even contemptuous. The general's manner could come across as aristocratic, a posture that clashed with Roosevelt's politics and with the inclusive public persona he cultivated. There are reports of terse meetings, curt replies, and an atmosphere in which mutual annoyance replaced mutual trust. If a private exchange went far enough, an insult or a refusal to acknowledge protocol, it could have pushed Roosevelt to consider dramatic remedies. Here again, the record is not a neat diary entry that says, "I almost fired him." It is a series of impressions, private notes, and second-hand recollections. Label that indefinido. We are in the territory of interpretive reconstruction rather than certifiable incident. A third line of explanation emphasizes political calculation rather than personal offense. Roosevelt's horizon extended beyond any single theater. He needed allies, coordinated plans, and a leadership team that would not undermine alliance cohesion. MacArthur's actions in the Philippines, his public promises to return, and his fierce sense of personal honor had regional consequences that could become diplomatic headaches. Roosevelt had to weigh: keep an iconic commander who inspires the public and troops, or discipline him to preserve civilian primacy and Allied trust. The tension here is institutional. Not that Roosevelt hated MacArthur, but that he recognized the danger of unchecked military celebrity. Historians who favor this reading point to memos and cabinet discussions that emphasize the political costs of independent military pronouncements. Yet whether Roosevelt ever intended to terminate MacArthur's command solely on political grounds, without wanting to manage the fallout, is debated, another indefinido. These hypotheses are not mutually exclusive. The most compelling picture is usually a mix. MacArthur's theatricality irritated a president operating under enormous political constraints. Private slights reinforced suspicions of political ambition, and the accumulation of such incidents made the prospect of removal a live option within Roosevelt's circle. That mix, personality plus politics, is the pattern we see elsewhere in wartime leadership controversies. It is what makes the story plausible, even when a smoking gun memo does not exist. Why would a personal matter ever become reason enough to consider firing a senior commander? The short answer is that at the top, private and public bleed together. A commander's private contempt, voiced in a curt line or a dismissive gesture, can be translated into a public narrative. He disrespects civilian authority. He undermines Allied unity. He courts fame at the expense of coordinated strategy. In a democracy waging total war, that narrative is dangerous. Presidents must manage reputations as carefully as they manage logistics. They must prevent the rise of parallel centers of power. So personal grievances are never merely private when they affect perception, morale, and cohesion. Think of two types of commanders. One charges ahead, improvises, expects the political machinery to get in line behind him. The other treads more cautiously, seeking to consolidate gains, coordinate with allies, and protect the political seams. Both approaches have merits. Both can be frustrating to a president who needs both daring and discipline. MacArthur's reputation fit the first pattern. A propensity for sweeping declarations, a willingness to accept the glare. Roosevelt, seeking a balance of political coalitions and international previews, had to manage that glare. What would have happened if Roosevelt had actually fired MacArthur? Speculation branches into several scenarios, none definitive. Removing a celebrated general might have caused a public outcry, particularly in the Philippines and among patriotic constituencies who saw MacArthur as a symbol of return and resilience. It might have reassured Allied leaders anxious about centralized strategic control. Or it could have inflamed partisan rhetoric, giving rise to accusations that the president had undermined the military in a time of need. Roosevelt's aides appear to have weighed these costs, which is one reason any consideration of dismissal remained cautious and ultimately non-committal. There are documented aftermaths in which relations cooled, where trust frayed and channels of communication grew cautious. But causal links, from a single private slight to a particular change in strategy, are slippery. Historians debate whether a specific spat altered operational plans or simply adjusted personnel dynamics. Where evidence is thin, the responsible narrative is to acknowledge uncertainty and map the plausible consequences. In the Roosevelt-MacArthur case, the most defensible claim is not that Roosevelt definitively moved to fire MacArthur for one personal incident, but that he and his advisers perceived the general's personality as a potential political threat and discussed measures, from reprimands to reassignment, to mitigate that risk. That perception over time shaped how they managed MacArthur's command. What does this tell us about leadership under pressure? It suggests that decisions at the top rarely rest on pure strategic criteria. They involve human judgments about temperament, loyalty, and risk. A president's authority is not just military, it is partly theatrical. It must be convincing in print, on the radio, and at the summit. Generals operate in a different theater, the field, where boldness is rewarded. When a general's style begins to feel like a rival performance, the president faces an ugly choice. Contain the general and risk appearing weak to rank-and-file supporters, or tolerate the general's autonomy and risk fracturing the political command structure. If we return to our opening line, Roosevelt almost fired MacArthur for a completely personal reason, the sober conclusion is more nuanced. It is plausible that personal offenses, public pronouncements, and the general's cultivated image combined to make dismissal a serious option within Roosevelt's circle. But the archival trail does not deliver a single, incontrovertible, really happened moment that historians can point to and stamp as fact. The claim is best read as shorthand for a broader reality. Private slights and personality clashes can and did inform high-level wartime decisions, sometimes coming perilously close to precipitating dramatic action. So which interpretation should we favor? If your inclination is toward personality-driven explanations, the case is persuasive. MacArthur's temperament and showmanship created repeated headaches that could, in the right private conversation, tip the scales. If you prefer structural explanations, you'll emphasize that Roosevelt's concern was less about a single insult and more about preserving civilian supremacy and Allied cohesion. Both readings are defensible. Both illuminate different facets of the same knotty problem. History often resists tidy resolutions. The Roosevelt-MacArthur story is a reminder that great events sometimes turn on small human moments. A curt word in a hallway, a telegram sent in haste, a private irritation made public. Those moments do not render deterministic narratives. They complicate them. They show how the personal and the political are braided into the decisions that shape wars and peace. What do you think mattered most in this case? MacArthur's personality or Roosevelt's political calculus? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this look at the private dynamics behind public history interested you, share the video and subscribe for more examinations of the people who shaped pivotal moments.